Hello, everyone. I'm Leanne Morfitt, and I'm here today with Bobbi Newman and Bobbi Rogers, and they have partnered to shed a light on how COVID-19 has affected our special needs population. Bobbi Newman is a world-renowned psychologist and behavior analyst and author of many publications, books such as Behavior Detectives and What the Function. He will be interviewing Bobbi Rogers, who is a parent advocate, nonprofit founder, and director of an agency that provides therapy to children with autism. Bobbi, why don't I let you take it over from here?
Okay, I'm going to assume that you're referring to me this time.
Yeah, how should I differentiate? Dr. Newman. Dr. Newman?
Bobbi is fine, but that's just part of me. Whenever I work with Bobbi Rogers, it's always good. It's perfectly fine. So, Bobbi Rogers, can you give us a little bit of a timeline? And I want to kind of set this up because obviously 2020 has been a year for the books, and COVID-19 kind of snuck up on us. I don't know how else to put it, where there were initially news reports, but then they were kind of downplayed. People started buying masks, then we were told we didn't need masks, and then suddenly it became everybody must wear a mask. And certainly there were tremendous milestones as regards people with developmental disabilities, such as the group living arrangements being locked down and nobody being allowed to visit, nobody being allowed to go home. There were all kinds of changes that took place, and each one of these changes had sort of an impact. I don't know how clearly you can remember the whole chronology, but can you give us a little description of how this began and what sort of impacts we saw?
So I would start with March, because I think all of us can agree, all of a sudden in March, we went from living life normally to all of a sudden it felt like everything stopped with no warning whatsoever. I think we were all a little blindsided by that. And definitely the special needs population felt the effect of no warning and having no services all of a sudden. In March, I know that for us, my son has autism and he's on the severe end of the spectrum, as you know, and he is in a group home for kids. All the kids in his group home are in high school and they have varying disabilities. And we, in March, were told in the middle of March that there were no more visitations allowed because of the risk of people being infected and coming in and bringing, COVID into those group homes. And unfortunately, what that meant for us was that we didn't have time to prepare ourselves, much less our son. And preparing him, even if we had tried, would have been a very difficult task, given the limitations that he had conversationally. So I felt like none of us were ready for it, but we were kind of thrown into it. But I also think that across the board, none of us expected it to go as long as it did. So at that time, although we were worried about how Joey was processing, not seeing us, and did he understand it's not because we didn't want to visit him, and it wasn't because we didn't miss him. It was because we couldn't, and we didn't know if he understood that, but we felt like this was going to be a few weeks, so it would be okay. And, we'd get together and we'd explain it after the fact and FaceTime and do all the things that we could in the meantime. And then time kept going on and we still were unable to visit. And he clearly wasn't handling that very well. And I can say that I think most families of children that are in group homes that I spoke to and that I know felt very similarly. about how well their children were handling not being able to have visitation and not having preparation. So not only are we talking about kids who didn't understand, but they're kids that thrive on their routine. So we had two things that really changed drastically without the ability to prepare any of us for them. So it was extremely difficult for all of us. And I think the worry on behalf of the parents was tremendous. And then in our case, our son started increasing both his aggressive behaviors and also his self-injury. And by April, we were seeing him engaging in headbanging behavior that had become dangerous enough to start talking to his team about whether or not there were concussions happening on a regular basis. All of the things that we thought we would be able to use, like FaceTime, were not working. He would see us through his iPad and not understand why we couldn't visit because there you are. So he'd just hang up on us. So we couldn't really get much accomplished with that. So as April wore on, it was getting more and more difficult, and we were getting more and more worried. And then by May, we decided we need to bring him home. He is, banging his head to a rate that we think is unsafe. And certainly in May, we still felt like, okay, we've waited this out a long time. We're on the home stretch. We'll bring him home. It'll be a few weeks, and he'll get kind of hit that reset button, get back on track, and then we'll bring him back. So we brought him home in May, and then time continued. We went through May. May, I loved. If I'm being honest, I loved May. I loved having all my children there. Joey was so happy to see us. We had so many great moments as a family. We celebrated Easter late so Joey could be part of it. And it was really, I think, a great month for us. Overall, all of us being there and having quality time was something I enjoyed. So I can't complain about the first few weeks that Joey came home. But after that, he didn't, again, understand, okay, what's my life going to look like now? And that anxiety was starting to become a dominant part of what his day looked like. So all of those things that were happening at school, the increase in aggression, the increase in self-injury, started happening at home. He wasn't sleeping. I suspect that probably happened when he was at school as well. He wasn't eating, which I knew at school he wasn't eating because he had lost quite a bit of weight prior to our getting him in May. So all those things started happening at home, and it got to the point, I would say, by July, where, I think that both Joey and I were struggling for more of the day than we were enjoying our days. It was aggression, self-injury, and then he'd be upset if he got aggressive. And part of me was like, okay, I'm going to force them to let me bring him back. But by that time, I had already identified that we don't know how long now this is going to last. Like, we made that decision already once, thinking we had a couple weeks, and here we are. But by mid-July, we knew that either he's going to have to go back to school where he has that 24-hour routine, care, and staff, or we're going to probably be looking at hospitalizing him for his behaviors to keep him safe. So it was by the grace of God that we were able to bring him back. The first day you could bring your kids back if you had brought them home was July 29th. So he returned July 29th. And I think we were all glad, mostly, for that, for his sake. But it was bittersweet because I'd gotten used to having him home, and I had relished all the things I didn't get to have with him when he was in his group home. And I sort of got in a habit of having him around and enjoying his company. And so as much as I knew both of us were really struggling, and him in particular, and so I knew this was the right thing, it felt like going through all the emotions when we first brought him to the group home. I remember you and I caught up with each other in July, and I've known you for a really long time. You were a part of Joey's life when he was first diagnosed at 3 years old, I think is the first time we met you. And in all of that time, our family's gone through lots, between it being newly diagnosed parents and making the decision for the group home, a few hospitalizations for behaviors. And I don't think I ever got as emotional as when we spoke in July. It was just, all got a little bit too much, I think, for me. And, that was eye-opening for me too, that, where are all of us? And all of my friends whose kids were on the more severe end of the spectrum were feeling the same way. And I don't mean to keep saying the severe end of the spectrum. It's just the world that I know. I'm not diminishing the journey of other people. But from my perspective, it was really difficult when you have a child with those challenging behaviors to figure out what to do. And I think the other thing we all felt as families is you're not always well received when you talk about these challenging parts of autism. Sometimes there can be some backlash to discussing this. I think people want to hear the best parts of this journey, and there's so many to talk about that. For the beginning of our journey, that's what I focused on all the time. I would always, whenever I talked to families or presented or did anything in a group setting, would talk about all of our successes and really focus on that as much as I could. And it's only been in the last few years that I felt like I need to get braver. I need to get more honest, because there's other families out there that need that. And so over the last couple of years, I've tried, and I've mentioned to you before that I'm working on trying to be a little braver with my words. A friend of mine in particular was interviewed regarding her feelings when she couldn't see her son. And she was interviewed by our local news station. And under her interview on social media were lots of comments where people talked about, did she rehome her kid? And what do you expect if you put your child in a group home? And that was a big point for me where I said, I'm done being quiet. I think we all just need to be open about the reality of this for our kids, because I don't want that to happen to somebody because they told their truth and they were authentic and they were brave enough to tell it publicly. So I've kind of changed in that way and have grown from the COVID experience because of that. And now Joey's doing pretty well. A few weeks ago, I would say he finally kind of adjusted to being back. And now he's on quarantine again. So hopefully when he's off quarantine, it will, only be a few weeks and we'll be okay. We won't be at the place we were. I've got my fingers crossed, but he started as of about last month doing really well and readjusting and kind of healing from everything that happened. And so hopefully the quarantine won't be much longer.
Oh, wow. That's really quite the journey there. And I mean, I find myself thinking two parallel threads that I don't know if you have any reaction to. The first is just from Joey's perspective, or from anybody diagnosed on the spectrum, understanding the social interactions when in fact many people don't even bother to explain. I know what great pains you took to try to explain the situation to Joey, and other people just make the assumption, well, he's not going to get it anyway, and they don't even try. But given the nature of the autism spectrum and language processing deficits and social understanding deficits, that has to be brutal to not understand why your world has changed so dramatically. Why is everybody walking around with these face coverings now? I've reliably been going home to see mom and dad and my brother and sister every weekend, and now I'm not, and I don't know why. That has to be incredibly anxiety provoking. And one of the things that, as I talk to anybody, the theme that keeps coming across is, when is this going to be done already? I feel like I could handle it if I saw an end date. That was the thing. I think a lot of people kind of felt blindsided, where at first it was, all right, 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and we're now, 10 months into 2 weeks to flatten the curve? If there was an end line in sight, and I know we have the vaccines that are coming out now, but still, it's not like we could just point to the calendar and say, that's when everything will be done. Mm-hmm. And so many people diagnosed on the spectrum take such comfort in schedules and knowing when things will be. And now that's been ripped away from them, from all of us. But it seems like the impact must be so much more for people like your son and other people diagnosed on the spectrum. I certainly feel for him myself, because I find myself, when are we going to be done here?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Oh, go ahead. Did someone else?
Yeah, please.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I don't want anyone to think that, we didn't try to talk to Joey, or that parents don't try. So it isn't a matter of thinking he couldn't understand a conversation, because he certainly could, but his anxiety was so high that he was unable to really receive it, process it, and be comforted by that conversation. So I think it would have taken having the conversation over and over and over throughout the space of a day. And I'm not sure, given how high his anxiety was without his routine, if he would have been in a place to receive that information and really believe it. And I would also say too, I think for a lot of us parents whose children aren't as verbal, as we would like and hope for, it's hard to know exactly what they're thinking. So my son can say things like what he wants to eat, and he can say, if something hurts, but he doesn't have the ability to say things a little more abstract, like where he stands with COVID and how he's feeling. That's tougher for him. So part of what was difficult for us was not knowing. Did he know that we are coming back? You are not there and you're never going to see us again. We are 100% coming back. And certainly every time that I spoke to him, I would tell him that. And there were times where we would have conversations about something other than COVID, and he absolutely got it, totally got it. But in this case, his anxiety, which is such a dominant part of his life anyway, created a place where he could not receive it. That processing is already difficult for him. Hearing language and processing it is a skill that he's still working on. So to add all the anxiety, to add a lack of routine, to add, the abruptness of it with no preparation, then led us to a place where I don't think he was able to receive it and process it. And there wasn't another way that we found that worked. We certainly tried various things. His staff is incredible. They definitely tried. They are now during his quarantine. We have calendars. We show him the day that he can come home. But even that makes me nervous, because technically we can pick him up in a week. But who's to say that there isn't going to be another staff person, and now we have 2 more weeks, or another one of the students. So I'm nervous about that too, because if we don't have the ability to pick him up on the 17th, then going forward, whenever I say this is the day and here's your calendar, he's not going to believe that we actually are, and he'll be back to a place of wondering if we're going to pick him up. So that's really hard to watch. It's really hard to watch his siblings as well, because I think we underestimate the degree to which they take on all of the emotions. They're taking on the emotions of their sibling, but also of their parents. And I did my absolute best, and my husband did as well, to put a brave face and talk very matter-of-factly, but they're living with us. So, there were times when it just I didn't have it in me to be, brave for everybody in the house, and they knew that I was struggling. And particularly when I knew he was headbanging and hurting himself, and he was at school and I was here, or when he would hang up on me and I knew exactly what he was thinking when he hung up on me on FaceTime. Those moments were not moments where I felt like I was the bravest version of myself. Luckily, I have a very kind and supportive family, so they did very well, and that. But I can't deny that it had a huge impact on Joey's brother and sister as well, and certainly my husband.
Knowing your family as I do, and how much they all love Joey and are very much involved and insightful, I don't think there's any way you could have put on a brave face that they would have seen through. And editorial comment, not that you should have had to put on a brave face, but even if you had done the best acting job in the world, I think everybody would have been able to see through it. That anxiety that you're mentioning, again, such a powerful factor right now. Probably not my finest moment, but the first night that the organization that I am the clinical director for, Proud Moments, the first night that we realized we were really moving over to telehealth entirely, I huddled up on Zoom, so to speak, with all of our BCBAs. And one of the things that came out of my mouth was, anybody who works on caller ID right now is getting kicked in the head, which probably, again, not the most professional thing I've ever said, but sadly not the most unprofessional thing I've ever said either. What I was getting at was, all bets are off. We're dealing with a completely different situation than we were dealing with a week ago. And the things that we need to be looking at now are, how do we manage these transitions? how do we provide the necessary behavioral supports? Remember, people were in group homes for a reason in the first place, and it was a heartbreaking decision for families that this was going to lead to a better life for their child in terms of more widely available activities, more widely available therapies, all kinds of things. But it wasn't a decision made lightly. And now it's being reversed, and everyone has to do kind of the best they can. There was an article in Behavior Analysis and Practice where there was a quote. I should have thought to pull it up. I'll pull it up on one of our subsequent interviews. But it talked about how parents were put in this situation that was unreasonable, where they were being asked to A, homeschool their other children, B, work from home, C, manage all the other affairs in terms of possibly their business had been shut down and now they need to file paperwork with the government and other things related to the restrictions and what have you. Now, I have since realized that even my joking statement was a misstatement. Because of that anxiety that I was just talking about, maybe caller ID is comforting to some people, and they actually would take comfort in the routine of working on skills like that. But the point that I was trying to get across was that the priorities may have changed very dramatically in terms of now, while of course we always should have been working on appropriate ways to occupy your downtime, now that just jumped the line in terms of priorities because there's not that 6 or 7 hour school day anymore. And now, it's been something we've been working on in terms of accepting new foods, but because some people had to go on hoard, now the foods that the child would ordinarily eat aren't available anymore. And now we need to work on, accepting new foods. And there's a lot of things that we're just going to change very dramatically. But maintaining whatever structure we could that would be comforting would certainly be helpful. So what you're talking about here really sort of captures the balance that had to be struck between trying to help to adjust to the new situations while using the tools that we had available to try to make things as smooth as humanly possible. But again, so many people were put in what I would consider to be, and as I'm quoting this article here, not only unreasonable but unrealistic. It just wasn't going to happen that you were going to be able to be on top of and monitor a child's behavior all day while you're homeschooling the other children, while you're working from home, while you're whatever. And I know you yourself are perfectly capable of keeping, I don't know how many plates spinning or wearing how many hats or whatever metaphor we want to use. But I'm now finding myself thinking of the parents who were just pulled in literally 17 directions at once. Again, I would just love your take on that.
I felt the same way in terms of worrying about other families. I think it crossed my mind every day. One of the things that our nonprofit, my husband and I started a nonprofit about 15 years ago, and one of the programs in that is a crisis intervention program. So those are families of kids with challenging behaviors. It can be anything from the aggression and self-injury I was referring to earlier, but also kids that aren't eating enough, kids that aren't sleeping enough, kids that are doing things like smearing feces, stuff like that, that really can cause a lot of anxiety in the home for the family as well as the child. So those families, I think, crossed my mind regularly. How are they coping? How are they doing? And what you were talking about in terms of what the world expects, those were families I worried a great deal about, as well as everybody else, because I think it speaks so well to have someone like yourself who's been in the field for so long tell parents these were unreasonable. And you sent me that article and I did read it, and I was glad to see it publicly available to people who are working for families, because I want the message to be to our families. These expectations that were given to you by the world right now are not reasonable. So it's okay if you can't do it all. In our case, when Joey's school was remote, the academic part of it, I spoke with his speech therapist and we both agreed not to do telehealth, that it would be, more frustrating than it would be valuable for him. And certainly we didn't make that decision across everything. Some of the things we knew were things that, you know, he would be fine with. But I felt free to make that decision. I didn't feel guilty about that, partly because his speech therapist and I did walk through what he would respond to and what would work and didn't. And so I had her blessing. But I know a lot of families that really struggled to make telehealth work. And it wasn't a smooth conversation for them to have with their team about, this just isn't working. I'm going to try to do it at home. And even that, you know, message, I'm going to try and do it myself at home, makes me nervous, because I think we were all just trying not to drown. And so the idea of saying, let me take some more on. I mean, you had kids who weren't sleeping because they were out of their routine. And so you have caregivers who aren't sleeping. And now we're going to add a bunch of demands on their time during the day, when really I think we all just needed to heal and do the best we can. So I'm glad that you said that, and I'm glad that these things exist out there for people to refer to, because I think parents need to hear that these expectations were not reasonable. And you shouldn't feel bad if you say, here are the priorities for my family. This is what we need to do right now. And these things, even if there's regression, even if we have to make up for it after the fact, we'll make up for it. We'll work hard. We'll get things back to where they need to be. But for right now, these are the things that I can handle. And that is an okay thing for a family to say. It is scary. And there's, you know, all of us parents, I think there's such a natural tendency to lean into your guilt. I haven't done enough. I haven't done enough. I need to do more. You talk to another family who thought of an idea you didn't think of, and you immediately say, oh, I can't believe I didn't do that. I can't believe I didn't think of that. And it's just such a natural thing that we end up doing. So I'm glad that we're having this conversation, because I hope there's families out there that just relax and say, okay, if you're doing the best you can, that's all the world needs to expect from you.
Absolutely. And as you were speaking, a number of things ran through my mind. One was an old mantra on behavior treatment plans, which is the best behavior treatment plan in the world, if it isn't realistic, is not worth the paper it's printed on. So it could be technically brilliant. It could be something that would be incredibly effective. But if the resources are not there to carry it out, it's not worth the paper it's printed on, because it's not going to happen. It's not going to have the effect that it should. And again, you were using the word unreasonable that I quoted from the article. Excuse me, I would want to take that one step further and just throw that word unrealistic out there. And we really have to be dealing in the level of realism. What can actually be done given the resources we have? How many hours are there in the day? How many hours are you being expected to attend to your job in terms of working from home, possibly for those who are working from home and those who are now going back into the offices? How many hours are you talking about homeschooling with other siblings in the house? Even just simple things like, how many people can be on telehealth at once? If you have 3 children, as you all 2 adults, and kids, adults, children, to me, they're always going to be children. I'm always going to say Lily is a 12-year-old, and it's never going to change, I guess. That's my curse. But there's a limited bandwidth. There's a limited number of machines. There's a limited number of Bobbi Rogerses who can be going around. Now, fortunately, your older children probably don't need your help with their homework or what have you, but if we were talking about this 10 years ago, different ball game, and for other families, it is a different ball game. So that issue of being realistic, I think, is, again, really crucial, and particularly when we're talking about people who are not sleeping, possibly because of disruptions and anxiety, and not eating, again, possibly disruptions, anxiety, or because of food sensitivities and food selection issues, and now, you know, people are grabbing everything. Again, I'm not the nicest person in the world by any stretch of the imagination, but I remember early on watching people filling up their carts in the supermarket, clearly hunkering down and, okay, I understand your panic, but can you possibly think about that kid who only eats Cheerios? And now they're not going to be Cheerios. And do you really need every single box you just stuffed in your cart there, Spike? You know, it's very hard for me not to see things through that lens, because I knew so many people who would now be suffering with the shortages and with the difficulty of getting certain things, and again, just this disruption in life to so many people. So, you know, as I joke about it, when you and I present together, everyone always knows that you're the nice one. So let me throw the nice one to you. I just described some not so nice behavior. What's been happening in the community that has really made you happy? I mean, have you seen some nice support out there that people are understanding and recognizing just what other people are going through?
Yes. Yay. I'm so glad for this question. Thank you for asking. I think that although this is a difficult time to live through, it's also a very special time to live through. I feel like when the chips are down, there's beautiful people out there and they just think of beautiful things to do to help other people. We have teachers and therapists who turn themselves inside out to try and make remote learning work. There's a lot of time that goes into planning that. They cared very much about their students. They dropped supplies off at their house. There were car parades. There was all kinds of let's get together and help mentalities happening and growing. And, you know, definitely, especially in the beginning when people were kind of almost in shock, like all of a sudden everything happened. I felt like so many people were really talking about what can we do? What can we do? And for me, I felt so encouraged that, you know, the future is going to be so much brighter. We're really talking about humanity. We're really talking about who are our vulnerable citizens and what can we do? So I felt like, you know, overall, there was so much of that it was encouraging and it just provided a great deal of hope. I think, you know, I looked at some social media posts. Everybody was posting, hang in there, we're behind you, very supportive type things. And it felt really good to be a part of that. I think sometimes it can be overshadowed by things like, you know, when summer camps were allowed to open, but summer school wasn't allowed to open, and restaurants opened, but we still couldn't do visitation in a group home where, you know, there's 6 kids in his home. So I think sometimes that disparity overshadowed all this other stuff. And also the fact that there wasn't enough of a dialogue around special needs in general. So people felt like they had to really talk about what was happening to families of loved ones with special needs, because it didn't feel like that was visible. Even when you would hear, you know, in the news what was going to be happening with group homes, it would be under the context of a nursing home. You know, nobody even talked about group homes. You had to just know that that's what they were, you know, classified with. So I feel like a lot of us in the special needs community, we're very vocal about this other stuff because that's the piece we didn't hear about. But I don't want all this other stuff to be lost, because I can say that there was a lot of hope that I felt during that time watching this. I loved how much quality time we got with our kids. I mean, I used to tell my kids all the time, you're trapped with me. You can't go anywhere. The governor said so. And I would make them play games with me. They liked it. I swear they liked it. They just kept that to themselves. I loved that as a mother who just like would obsess about my kids if I was given the chance to do so and not look totally weird to the world. I was like, this is kind of great for a little while anyway. I felt that way. But it was really neat. I mean, there were some great memories in there, but also people stepped up in ways, thought of things to do and dropped off care packages and just really tried to take care of each other. And I love that part of everything that's happened over the last few months. I think that was tremendous and something to really remember.
Thank you. And just while you were saying that, I realized what a slob I've been. Forgive me. I didn't look behind me because I just, my office is my office. But what I've got behind me are cartons of toys that people in the ABA world in particular, and people within Proud Moments and other people have donated for a toy drive we collect for the John Thiessen Children's Foundation here on Long Island. And people have just really stepped up this year to the point where, you know, I drive my Mini Cooper convertible, and I don't want the toys flying out of the top, but there's no way I'm going to be able to get them all into a Mini Cooper, all these donations. I'm going to have to borrow my wife's car to get the donations. And so forgive me for being a slob behind me. That's what all those boxes are. Those are donated toys that people have, you know, purchased and sent here. Then I'll do the Santa sleigh thing to bring it over to the John Thiessen Foundation. But again, it is heartwarming, and it's nice to hear the community stepping up like that. The flip side is it is very frustrating to hear the governmental response, and really it seems not capturing the gravity of this situation. I've had reports of people literally putting their heads through walls. I mean, you hear that expression, but literally breaking the sheetrock with their head over things like anxiety regarding the visitation issues, and to have those kind of glossed over. And I know some people had, put different reasoning on it. Well, this is a different type of environment. Not everyone is going to be doing the sanitizing the same way, and maybe that's why they're handling it a little differently. Then at least say that. Don't just make it we have not factored that in, which is what it often seemed, that it just wasn't being considered. So that definitely is a very powerful kind of place to be in, where you really have to think about, is there somebody looking out for the best interests of my child and family, and are they doing it on any kind of real rational basis? So that being said, I'm going to give you the opportunity to fix the world here. What comes next? How does the lesson of what has been happening get translated into policy in the future, as far as Bobbi Rogers thinks things need to be changed to make it better? God forbid there's ever a next time, but again, moving ahead, what needs to change? What needs to be properly appreciated and maybe tweaked into policy?
Well, for starters, I think that we don't do a great job right now putting our most vulnerable citizens as a priority when determining things like wages, rules regarding all these restrictions. I feel like it's an afterthought, and it bothers me because when you think about all of the great people that stepped up and what we were just discussing about, how all these beautiful things were happening, that's what people want. That's where their heart is. We've seen that over these last few months. And yet, like I had said before, the priority was summer camps over summer school. That was really a very eye-opening moment. So I think what we have to do first is really examine what happened when people were making, in the moment decisions because they had to. Where did we all fall? Are we paying the people who work with our people with disabilities, our elderly, enough? It's not okay if somebody's making more at a fast food restaurant, and that is right now the case. And so when that happens, and then you're asking these people in the middle of a pandemic to be the staff person that gets these people through without seeing their family, with all their fears, are we compensating for that? And if we aren't paying people enough, how can we then expect to get well-trained people in these homes and in working with all of our vulnerable? So I think that's the first thing. What I will say is one good thing that came out of this in that respect was a lot of advocacy groups were born. So there's one in particular here in New York State where there's thousands of members, and it started just during the pandemic. So this hasn't been around for years, and they've been very successful in getting, their voices heard. But there's been a few others as well. So the passion of advocacy by all of our families has really resurfaced and grown. And so I love that that has happened. But I also think that we need to talk and we need to listen. So parents like myself need to start talking and being honest about our talk, about what we say, and not worry so much about if this person's going to be upset with what we say, if this person doesn't understand. We still really need to say our truth, because only when we are feeling free enough to do that can we really talk about what's needed in our communities. So I think that those of us parents that have a story to tell need to tell it. And I think those people that are in a position to make change, whether it's service providers, whether it's, people in government, wherever someone may fall in working with some of our vulnerable populations, if you're in a position to make a difference, stop and listen first. Be an active listener so you really have that information, because when someone really generates understanding of somebody else's journey, then you tend to make a bigger impact. You don't look for the impact, it just starts to happen because you understand it. And I think if we generated some understanding, then we'd be less likely to kind of stay under the radar during times like this, because that's absolutely what happened. I think we all learned that the special needs population wasn't a dialogue we saw happening during all of these restrictions. Now I see a little bit of it. I see, news shows talking about, school restrictions and how they affected special needs kids. So clearly people are starting that conversation. We have a lot of lessons to learn about what happened when everything shut down. What did we do right? What did we miss? And how then can we take those lessons and do better?
That is so important. And again, something that happened within the last month, forgive me, the dates are kind of falling together for me. Maybe it was a little bit more than a month, maybe a month and a half ago. But there was that horrible, horrible story of the mother and teen who died together in the fire in California, Theda, and her son. I don't know, as people who are not familiar with the autism spectrum have talked to me about that, or, again, forgive me, only familiar with certain versions of it that are, shown on TV kind of thing. The gravity of that situation and the inability to have him leave the home during a fire, and make no mistake about it, she had to make a choice to save herself or not, and she chose not to. And to me, there's no question that they both died because of his autism, in terms of his inability to alter his usual behavior and to overcome, I don't know what it was, whether it was a schedule thing, I don't get out of bed until X time, or maybe it was a panic because of, just this unusual situation, and he froze and she was unable to move him. But I don't think many people who are not familiar understand, again, my son is in musical theater, so I find myself thinking in musical theater terms very often in lyrics. The stakes for your gambling are frighteningly high. And I think people miss that, just how serious that this is not a minor inconvenience. This is life and death. And I think this is where, again, I'm so happy to hear people now speaking up, because it's not pleasant to think of that level of disability that could actually kill somebody, but that's reality. And I again, how much I respect you in all these ways to start with, and your bravery in terms of, I know the slings and arrows that you have received over the years, just how, again, I'm just glad to hear that this is becoming more of a conversation where people are becoming more aware of just how, again, changes like this, that for many of us, it's irritating as all get out. I was personally very annoyed and grumbling over my breath constantly because my gym was closed for however long my gym was closed for. What the hell is wrong with me that I'm so concerned about my gym being open when we're talking about the kind of stakes that we're playing for here? So that's my own little mea culpa. But again, I sometimes cringe, I'm not going to lie about it, when people say we're all in this together.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're all in this together, but some of us are in yachts, some of us are in canoes, and some of us are hanging on to life preservers. So yes, we're all in this together, but we're not all coming at it with the same tools and with the same concerns. And again, forgive me, I've been kind of ranting here. I wasn't sure if you had any commentary sort of on that.
Yeah, definitely. That mom was a warrior mom. She was a huge advocate. And what I love about her is she was a brave mom. So she spoke her truth. And it was tremendous. And she's, one of the people that really inspires me to try and be a little braver about our journey, because she wasn't afraid. She told her truth, and she did it so eloquently and respectfully. A couple of weeks ago, actually, before the quarantine, Joey was home with us on a Saturday, and we had a carbon monoxide leak. So, and she was in my head the whole time because we had to call the fire department. It was a true leak. We had to get out of the house. It was definitely significant enough. We're staying in the house for an extended period of time was an issue. People were already not feeling well because of it. And I could not get Joey to move. And what's interesting about this is I know him well enough, and it wasn't like a fire where there was panic. I didn't feel panic. I just knew we had to get out of the house. So I very calmly spoke to my husband, and he figured out, okay, this is an issue. Something's going on. It's not good. And he got nervous, and he laid on the couch. He pulled the weighted blanket over him, and he looked at us and he said 2 words that he doesn't usually say: stay here. That's what he said. And I thought, oh boy, this is going to get sticky. So we tried everything. I said, Joey, why don't you come with me? We'll go to McDonald's. We'll get some lunch. I don't think in the 19 years he's been alive, he's ever said no to McDonald's. And so I thought for sure, oh, I got you. We'll go to McDonald's, and you don't even have to go to the doctor's first. And so you're going to come, you're going to get in the car. He looked at me, he pulled the blanket up even higher and said, stay here. And we knew based on his affect that it was going to be very difficult and that there probably would be some aggressive behaviors. So luckily my husband was home. So my daughter and I went out into the cars and waited in the cars. The fireman came in. I thought maybe when he saw them, he would, realize, okay, I got to get out. It made it worse. And so it really was a difficult process. And my husband, just had us all safe in the cars. And I hate to say it, but to be brutally honest, he knew there would be some aggression and he didn't want anyone to get hurt. So once the rest of the family was in the car and the pets, he was able to get Joey out. But the reality of that moment for me was I couldn't have done it myself. I would have had to wait for a fireman to come and help me. And we had the luxury, given a carbon monoxide leak versus a fire, to wait. But if it had been a fire, there's no way. And it was so interesting, and I just thought of that story over and over during that time because I would have never guessed that I couldn't have gotten him out of the house with McDonald's. I would have said, if somebody asked me, well, thank God for McDonald's. Mm-hmm. Thank God he loves it so much, because I could pretty much get him to do anything for McDonald's. All I have to do is say, Mom will buy you McDonald's. And when he got nervous and he realized, Mom said fire department, uh-oh, something's wrong. And that was it. He was so nervous and all he wanted to do is stay put. So, I actually posted that story on Facebook because, again, like I said, I'm trying really hard to get braver, and I made a decision, definitely throughout this pandemic to do it, even when it isn't comfortable. And Facebook is not something I generally like to rate my my problems, but I did. I told people that story because I genuinely would have thought that we would have been able to get him out of the house, and we were not. And so, she definitely was on my mind, and she's so inspiring because she is somebody who's always been brave. I've read pieces that she's written, and they're beautiful and they're honest, and we need more people like that. I hope this pandemic brings us to a place where parents feel the freedom to be honest and talk about this. Because in our case, we were able to have the fire department turn their sirens off before they came down our street. Like, we got so much accomplished by calling and being honest. This is our situation. They were there so fast, they probably would have been anyway. But all of those things would have helped us be a little more successful. So I hope all of these things, all of the stuff that has happened, everything that we've learned, how much we've all grown, really transform how we as parents and professionals treat each other, so that parents feel like they can be honest. And because she was, that mom was, she was beautiful. And she inspired me so much, and is the inspiration for my saying, I'm going to tell the world this happened. I don't know if I would have done it without her story.
Well, knowing you, I think you would have. And on behalf of everybody out in the world, let me say thank you for doing it, because that is so important for people to know. And again, forgive me, people who found their way to this discussion will probably know the people we're talking about. but the two individuals who unfortunately died in that fire, Mohammed and Feda Al-Maliti, I always have trouble with her name, Al-Maliti Feda, and her son Mohammed, they just, again, I always admired her writings as well, and it was one of those just gut punches to wake up one morning and read that story on a number of levels. One, I mean, I've been fortunate in my professional life to meet and interact with so many wonderful people, of which I obviously include you. I've never, to the best of my knowledge, my memory, ever had any kind of real, interactions with Feda, but again, someone you kind of fanboy from a distance in terms of reading her stuff and going, yeah. And it was just such a gut punch to read that and to know the circumstances, just kind of picture it. And that's something that, again, I thank you so much personally, and I hope this doesn't sound hokey, for making the decision to share that story about Joe and the carbon monoxide and everything, because I honestly don't know that people get it. I honestly don't know that people truly understand just what kind of stakes we want them playing for sometimes. And people sometimes talk to me because, as a professional in this field, and I've worked with the entire age range and everything from preschools through group homes and summer sleepaway camps and just everywhere that you could possibly run into crises and things like that. And been through any number of them, any number of dangerous situations and all kinds of things. But I would never stack my experience up against yours or anybody else's, because even if I'm away from home for a few weeks at a time, as it's happened and been through the ringer, I then go home to my wife and my typically developing child who's away at college now, but speaking metaphorically. And I get to, light up a cigar and pour myself some bourbon and recharge my batteries, which is a luxury that a lot of parents don't have. And, when do you get to rest? When do you get to, do what I do in terms of recharging after a time period? And I just really hope that people understand just what we're playing for here in terms of, and forgive me, I don't mean to make it sound so flippant in terms of using this expression playing for, but really understand the factors involved and understand just where this can go. Because I know you inside and out. You wouldn't have left.
No, you're right. Yeah.
This could be a conversation I could be having where, forgive me getting choked up here. People from all over the world could be contacting me saying, hey, I read what happened to your friend Bobby. That absolutely could have been the case. And not a thing I like thinking about. But that's the reality of what we're talking about here. And again, forgive me for getting a little choked up while I'm doing this. Not the most professional thing, I suppose. But again, it's really important to me that people who are listening get it and really understand. I'm brought back to a night in Ireland when I worked there, helping to set up a school program. And of all the places that I probably should not be, a country club, golf club. I don't play golf unless there's little ceramic elephants involved in windmills and things. I can play mini golf, but golf itself, never got the point. Hit the ball with a crooked stick and then walk after it. Not throwing as far as I'm concerned. But we would have these fundraisers there at night. And part of my job was to do some talks for people who came to the country club. And maybe they were there to support the charity because they're nice people, but they really didn't understand what the charity did or what autism was. And part of my job was to kind of explain that and talk about it a little bit in an opening speech. And, again, they were wonderful, fun nights. And I'm thinking of one particular occurrence where we were out on a deck, the country club afterwards, myself and some of the moms. And, of course, I had my pint of Guinness in one hand and my cigar in the other. And we're all talking, and a young person, to me, in her mid-20s, dressed in what I was later told was some 20,000 euro outfit, came over, and there was a moment of silence as she approached the circle. And then she said something to the effect of, I I don't think I have it in me to be a teacher, but could I be trained to be a childminder? Their expression for, watching children. Could I be trained to be a childminder so the parents could have a night out once in a while? It's a very powerful moment. And I feel like I'm channeling my inner Jose Martinez Diaz here, sorry. One of the moms in the circle, took a drag on her cigarette and then said, hey, she gets it. The fact that that was their life, that just being able to go out for an evening and be able to have somebody who could be home with their children was not something you take for granted. People would have to be specialist trained so that the parents could have an evening out. And again, just that level that we're playing for here, and again, forgive me for waxing historic here. I'm thinking back also to England when I worked in Northern England, and there was a young mom who had, there had been a divorce situation, and her son also had some severe impairments, but she was going to be able to go out. There was this new man that she was going to date, and she got very dressed up, and she was all set to go out. The childminder was just coming, and the young man got there early, and he was all dressed up too. And suddenly mom realized that her son had that kind of diarrhea that soaks into your socks, like the kind where you just throw the shoes away because there's no way you're ever going to clean the shoes. And it had gone everywhere. It was on the banisters, it was on the walls, it was on everything. Welcome to date night number 1. And the guy took off his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and said, right, where's the cleaning supplies? And the next day when we all heard this story, we said, okay, this is the guy she's going to marry. Because, this is the guy. And we were tough. I mean, it was that kind of thing. I would joke about it with the other fathers, and they had those very cute Northern English expressions like, "Oh, it'll be handbags at 5 paces." We were pretty, rough on people who were, just coming into the circle, so to speak. You had to pass some tests. But when this guy took off his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, and right, where's the cleaning supplies? Okay, you pass. That level of, again, where people, again, it's just so important to me, and forgive me if I'm being redundant, but this is one of the things that I love talking about with you, because you really do help people to understand just how, again, involved this can all be, and just where the needs really are. And I know we're running low on time, and forgive me that I blabbered on with a few of these stories here. As we're kind of winding down, what's the important takeaway points for people?
I think we just need to be kind and aware and to pay attention. We don't always know what to do. People aren't always going to know what to do. But we can smile through that. When you see someone struggling, smile, because they may, like you said, be out, and this may be the only time they got to get out, and they may have so much on their mind. But just smile at that person, that family that's trying to bring their child into the grocery store who won't wear a mask, and they keep trying to get their child to wear a mask. Just smile and don't judge. Parents, we need to lift each other up, not tear each other down. We have to, because we're the only ones that will do that. So if a parent shares their truth and it doesn't sound like your truth, that's not only okay, but they may need you to say, I hear you. And so we as parents have to do that for each other. And I think we just have to find our ways to understand. So take the time to talk to people like we are right now about what their experiences are, so that we do get to know where are there areas that we need to do better, and what can we each individually do. Some people may be able to do a lot. Other people may be able to just be kind, be supportive, and like I said, smile. We're all in different positions to help in different ways, and I think we can all figure out what the best way is for us. But I think it starts with understanding, a willingness to learn and to hear what people have to say. I don't think there's going to be a specific recipe, because there's so much still to be done. We still have so much that we need to do to support the disability community, to build more options. We have wonderful parents that have come before us that have done things like fight for inclusion, fight for all these opportunities and programs that those of us parents that came after have and didn't have to fight for. And I think each time there's a new generation of parents and professionals, we have to always be talking honestly with each other without judgment so that we can continue to try and endeavor to do better and better by the people that we're trying to work with. I think that we've seen some really beautiful, special things happen over the last few months. And I think that we can really take this special opportunity that we're living through and use it to grow and to do better. And I think, we're in the process of doing that. I think we can just do it more and more. I just hope people will be kind. I think that's the most important thing. That's not always something that we hear. I love how you always think of all these other families whenever there's something, that happens. It's one of the things I've always loved about who you are. You're so renowned in this field that you could be far past being, in a position where you see the visibility of what's happening to all of us. You could be building, policies and programs and not visible on the ground floor with the rest of us, but that's never, where you end up. You always end up right there in the trenches with us. And I hope other people hear that in what you've said today and are able to do that as well. All of us know somebody who's vulnerable. What are we doing about it? It's time that, those of us that are in a position to help are doing that. And that we, like you said, understand, the dire circumstances. I'm very lucky. I have a wonderful family. They are all supportive in this house. And that is a tremendous value add for me in my life and my son's journey. We have an incredibly supportive neighborhood, extended family, and I'm very lucky to have met some really, smart people who have been in our lives trying to guide us and teach us as a family. Not everybody has that. I'm lucky to live in a state where there are group home options that are really good options. So I don't have to, make a desperate decision. I can make an informed, good decision. So I don't take that for granted. And I would say we need more of that. We need people to really look at not what's politically correct, but what do we actually need? And that's going to happen when we're all open to talking honestly. So I hope those are all the takeaways from this time, because it is a really special opportunity that hopefully we don't have again.
Oh yeah, I'm with you on that, by all means. And I guess just as one little closing note, I hope that this talk has sort of inspired people who may not be as involved as they hopefully will be soon. What can they do? What should they do? Where should their time be spent? Should they try to volunteer somewhere? Is there somewhere you would recommend they're donating resources for people who've kind of been inspired? What should they do?
Well, if you know of a special needs family, you can do something as simple as drop an unexpected care package on their porch that says, I was thinking of you, you're important to me. That will lift their spirits. Definitely you should be familiarizing yourself with what are the regulations and laws out there that affect special needs population. And are you making an informed vote when you vote? Are you voting for people that stand by our special needs population? When you hear something like summer camps are opening and summer school isn't, even if your child isn't, in the special needs program at the school, you should have a problem with that. When you look at where funding is distributed, you should familiarize yourself with, is it hitting our most vulnerable citizens? When you look at how we take care of our vulnerable citizens and how we pay the people that are taking care of our loved ones, and we realize that's not near enough. No wonder we can't, we see such a turnover of staff in these facilities. What are we doing about it? Do we know these things and we've decided somebody else can be their voice? I think it's time where we all have to be a collective voice for these things.
That is awesome. I don't know that I could possibly add to that, except to say I always love talking to you, and I'm honored to be a part of this project, and just thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Newman and Bobbi Rogers. And we look forward to our further episodes and what else can be brought to the table by other people's experiences. And I'm glad you mentioned Jose, because that was a big loss to our community. He was a man who definitely inspired a lot of us. I know as a parent myself, his loss was tremendous because his heart was definitely where his brain was, which is much like you, Dr. Newman. So we appreciate that. And we have had significant loss in our community this year amongst everything. So so thank you for mentioning him, and thank you for your contributions. And that ends our first session. So we look forward to seeing everyone on our next one. Thank you.